Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This event is titled The Prospects of NATO Enlargement, Turkey's Stance on Finland and Sweden's Membership. Today, I'm joined by Burhanettin Duran from Ankara. He's the General Coordinator of the SETA Foundation, and Coffey, the Director of Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies at the Heritage Foundation. This is a distinguished lineup. I appreciate both of them being here and joining this discussion. We want to address two broad themes today. One, why Turkey has hesitations, concerns, reservations about the membership applications of Sweden and Finland. And the other one is the future of NATO following Russia's invasion of Ukraine and what's been happening past 4 months, what this means for NATO enlargement, and the future of the alliance. So first, I want to start with Professor Dr. Burhanettin Duran from Ankara, and I will ask him, Professor Duran, yesterday there were some meetings in NATO headquarters between Turkish delegation, Swedish delegation, Finnish delegations. And I think these are just part of a series of meetings that have been happening and will continue to happen. Press reports are showing kind of like, no major breakthrough about Turkey's position. We read last week that, the responses that these countries gave Turkey were not fully satisfactory just yet. So, and then at the end of the month, we have the Madrid summit, NATO summit in Madrid, Spain, coming up. And this issue will be one of the main agenda items there. How do you evaluate Turkey's position? What are some of the major objections Turkey has? And then I'll turn to Luke about what this means for NATO. Thank you for joining us again. Professor Duran, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ustun. Well, just before answering your questions, I want to share some general perception of what's going on in Ukraine and what is the impact of this on NATO issue. As we all know, the Russian invasion of Ukraine on 23rd February marked the beginning of a new era for the Western and NATO security concerns. Yes, there were heavy sanctions, increasing defense budgets, arms deliveries to Ukraine, and deployment of troops toward the alliance eastern border. And these all were perceived as Western solidarity. But still, we see that Russia is dominant in the southern Ukraine. So, and there are some European leaders visit to Kiev, and it was an act of a show of solidarity. But at the same time, there are some disagreements in Europe over what to do about Russia, whether it is to reach a settlement or to give the Ukrainians more heavy weapons to fight for more effectively. And even some European leaders are talking about not provoking Russia, or let's say Emmanuel Macron said that we must not humiliate Russia. Well, again, Pope Francis said that NATO's expansion might have provoked Russia. So all of these discussions are showing us that there are some problems within the Western bloc to deal with the Russian problem in the future months and years. But all of the people agree that this war will continue for years. There is no clear aspect or short aspect to end this war within a short time. Under these considerations, of course, Turkey understands that Sweden and Finland are demanding to be a part of NATO. And it is, in a principle, Turkey is not against this enlargement, simply because Turkey is supporting this enlargement of NATO since 1990s. But there is some objection to Swedish and Finnish enlargement and their membership to NATO because of their harboring efforts for PKK and its branch of YPG, and including FETA terrorist organization. These are the considerations of security for Turkey. These are not measures to block actually the membership of Sweden and Finland. On the contrary, it is some measures, some security measures to satisfy Turkey's security concerns in order to have more solidarity, cohesion within NATO. So sometimes it is criticized that, you know, this is playing in the hands of Putin, or why are you blocking this membership process? But for Turkey, from Turkey's side, this is an opportunity to have more unified and NATO and a cohesion against the threats. All people are expecting that just before the Madrid summit, there would be some comments against Russia and China. China as a threat to Europe and Western alliance, and China as a challenge actually to the system and to Western alliance. So, but at the same time, there are some comments that Greece can raise some issues regarding Turkey, regarding the problems between Turkey and Greece. So we will see, but on the in general level, Turkey is trying to contribute to NATO enlargement and cohesion, but this should be on the basis of satisfying Turkey's security concerns. Turkey is a member of NATO since for 70 years, so, and Turkey heavily contributed to NATO security achievements in the past. I don't want to repeat them, but for the members of NATO alliance, this should be a serious concern to satisfy Turkey's security concerns, and Sweden and Finland should be encouraged to do that, to meet Turkey's demands. This is not. This should not be considered as a concession. This should be considered as the fulfillment of the requirement for the membership to NATO. This is very crystal clear, and you know this membership is a very fast one, very speedy one. But this summit that will take place after 1 week is not the deadline for doing this. Yeah, if there is a serious concern in making this membership available or realized in the Madrid meeting, and then Stockholm and Helsinki should do more to satisfy Turkey's concerns in a not just words, but on deeds. Actually, this should be concrete and satisfying. Well, overall, my expectation is not so much tension in the meeting. Yes, there would be some negotiations, but still I'm hopeful that there will be a place for Sweden and Finland to make concrete that they are not supporting YPG, PKK, and FETA, and they are trying to satisfy Turkey's security concerns.
Thank you, Dr. Burhan. I want to quickly turn to Luke. Luke, you've just heard a great outline of sort of where Turkey stands, and could you address how you see that process and how you think that this might impact the future of NATO.
Thanks. I want to thank SETA for welcoming me back again to participate on a panel, especially this very important topic. There are a few points that I think are important to make up front on this. The first one, and it was already stated by Professor Duran, but I'll echo it. Turkey has always been a supporter of NATO enlargement. In fact, it's been one of the most vocal and robust supporters of NATO enlargement for countries like Georgia, Ukraine, at a time when taking a position like this was very unpopular amongst many of the European members of the alliance. Turkey has been a longstanding supporter of Bosnia and Herzegovina joining. It was a longstanding supporter of Macedonia finally getting into the alliance. It's been supportive of Kosovo's Euro-Atlantic aspirations. So even though Turkey is putting up opposition right now to Finland and Sweden joining over the issue of support to PKK, no one can ever make an argument that Turkey is not anything but pro-NATO enlargement. The second point, and I think many of my colleagues here in Washington need to have a better understanding and appreciation of this, Turkey has legitimate concerns, legitimate security concerns. This is the same with U.S. support to the YPG PKK terror group in northern Syria. I've spent so many hours of my life here in Washington trying to explain to my colleagues why Turkey has these legitimate security concerns. Turkey is a long-standing, very important member of NATO. It has participated in every major NATO operation, was the only country in NATO to have commanded, other than the United States, to have commanded ISAF twice in Afghanistan. Turkish troops were some of the last to leave Kabul International Airport. And throughout the Cold War, played an important role as the anchor of NATO's security in Southeast Europe. And in fact, during the Cold War, was one of only two countries that actually shared a border with the Soviet Union that were in NATO, the other one, of course, being Norway. But also, we have to acknowledge how great it would be for the alliance, for Sweden and Finland to join. And I think there are 5 reasons on why they can bring a lot to the table. Firstly, they both already possess very robust military capabilities. They have a very well-trained reserve force as well. And they use some of the most advanced equipment that's out there. A lot of U.S. equipment too. So from a U.S. point of view, this is a very positive thing. Finland already spends 2%, more than 2% of GDP on defense, which of course is the NATO benchmark. Sweden doesn't yet, but they've committed to reaching the 2% benchmark, and there's still many NATO countries that don't meet the 2% benchmark. So I think for that reason, possessing robust military capabilities, they would be an asset to NATO. Secondly, it would force NATO to focus more on the Arctic. I think NATO should focus more on what Russia is doing in the Arctic. China is more involved in the Arctic. And because Finland and Sweden are Arctic states, it would force more attention north, which I think would be a positive thing. Thirdly, their membership would improve regional security in the Baltic Sea region for NATO. Right now, the 3 Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, are sort of geographically isolated inside the alliance. There's only a small land border between Lithuania and Poland that connects the Baltic states to the rest of the alliance geographically. Otherwise, they're surrounded by Belarus and Russia, or Finland and Sweden, which of course are currently not in NATO. But if they were to get in NATO, it would allow NATO to react in a faster, more capable manner to an intervention in the Baltic region if both Finland and Sweden join the alliance. Fourthly, both nations have shown the political will to deploy forces. Considering that both have had this tradition of like military neutrality or non-alignment, they have contributed to overseas military operations. In Afghanistan, Sweden had deployed over the course of the war 7,000 troops, and they even led the provincial reconstruction team at one time in Mazar-i-Sharif. Finland deployed almost 3,000 troops throughout the course of the war, including special forces. Sweden contributed fighter jets to enforce the no-fly zone in support of NATO's no-fly zone above Libya. And both countries have deployed hundreds of troops to NATO, EU, and US-led missions in Iraq, the Balkans, and also across sub-Saharan Africa. And finally, both countries have shown a willingness to stand up from the threats from China, especially on the tech front. They have banned Chinese telecommunications companies such as Huawei from its 5G networks, and they've really tried to become a leader on this whole issue of 5G rollout across Europe being non-Chinese. And again, going back to my point about the Arctic, both of them have blocked Chinese attempts to acquire a large stake in important infrastructure in the above the Arctic Circle, such as ports or not ports, but such as airports and other research facilities. So, for that reason, they both would bring a lot to the table. This is why I think it's important that we see very strong leadership from the top of NATO, from the Secretary General. We see patience from Ankara, and we see open-mindedness and flexibility from Sweden and Finland so they can address the legitimate grievances and concerns that Turkey has. And I really think the more this is led by NATO in terms of bringing all the sides together, like the NATO Secretary General, I think the better. I think Jens Stoltenberg is one of the most savvy statesmen in Europe right now. And I think that, hopefully behind the scenes, he's playing a role here. But I think deep down inside, the Finns and the Swedes know that their security starts on Gotland Island and the Baltic Sea and not in northern Syria. I think deep down, Turkey knows that Sweden and Finland can bring a lot to the alliance. And at the end of the day, we will see Finland and Sweden take steps and measures that will address the concerns. As for the artificial deadline of the Madrid summit, I think this is not a necessary deadline. Not to mention the fact that all 30 countries in NATO have to ratify the accessions protocol for these countries to join, and this will take months. And we need to think long-term and big picture here. So if we can't get it done in the next 8 days, it's not going to change much. And if we can get it done over the next 8 months, I think that would be a positive thing. So one more thing, just more of a reminder than anything else. This isn't the first time that Turkey is within its right to have these concerns addressed. And these are actually serious concerns. And if you look at what happened to poor little Macedonia, for 10 years, Greece holding up NATO enlargement in one of the most crucial regions of Europe in the Balkans over a name. So unfortunately there is history of countries, a single country blocking NATO enlargement. But I would say in the case of Turkey, it's more of a legitimate one than what we saw with Greece and Macedonia. Thanks.
Thank you, Luke. Professor Duran, I want to clarify, perhaps you would want to help me with this. So Turkey's objections center around two main issues, right? The terrorism, how these countries approach terrorism, terrorist propaganda within their countries, and also the support for YPG and PKK in Syria. And then the sanctions on Turkish defense industry. And let's say one of them, Finland, is, it seems like an easier case because I think their support for PKK and other terror groups that Turkey really cares about is not the front and center issue, but more this military sales sanctions that, basically the logic is, why would you impose sanctions on a fellow ally? But both of these issues exist with some NATO allies. So do you see a strategy, Turkish strategy, to try to get NATO to think about these issues it's not just Sweden and Finland, but other allies also? I have more questions, but let me just stick to this. Perhaps you might have also things to say about what Luke said. Feel free to convey them as well.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ustun. Well, Turkey has actually 2 points for objecting Sweden and Finland's membership to NATO. As I said, it's not a principled one. It's just specific, and it is centered about one, support given to PKK and YPG, and the second one is sanctions, as you mentioned, embargo on defense industry towards Turkey. About the first one, just recently we saw that the PKK flags, posters, symbols were projected onto Swedish government buildings in Stockholm. Even while we are, as Turkey and Sweden, negotiating what should be done in this respect. So this is a vital issue. Yes, I understand that there is a large minority of Kurdish people living there, coming from different countries of the Middle East. This is not the case. This is not a problem. But Sweden actually has to make a differentiation between Kurdish people and the PKK followers. Because as Turkey, we know that PKK and YPG gets money, finance, militants, and propaganda facilities from different European countries, but especially in Sweden. Even it is not forbidden to make a propaganda of a terrorist organization. This is not acceptable to any NATO membership, to any NATO member. And this should be a prerequisite for the NATO membership. You made the point that not just Sweden and Finland, but also some other NATO allies are supporting YPG in the northern Syria. Well, there's a huge issue of tension between Turkey and the US. We have discussed this several times before. And actually, Luke made very concrete and true points. But still, we have our ups and downs between Turkey and the US over this issue. Turkey argues that the US should cooperate with Turkey on the fight against Daesh, not with another terrorist organization. And this created huge polemics between Turkish President Erdogan and some other US officials. But given this fact that, and even you can mention there are some PKK appearances in different capitals of Europe, that's right. But at the same time, Turkey considered this time as something to clarify for the newcomers. This is something to be met by all NATO members. So yeah, there is a difference between US and other allies, and specifically Sweden and Finland. But at the same time, Turkey underlines the reality that allies should not support terrorism. On the contrary, should work together to fight against terrorism, whether it is PKK, YPG, or Daesh, or FETÖ. So this is a principle to be taken by all the allies. So now I can say that Turkey did this several times to criticize European countries and the US. Now this is the time for an enlargement, and we have to be honest and concrete and frank to our new allies. And I consider that Sweden and Finland will be in the future members of NATO if they satisfy Turkey's security interests. It's not hard to do that, and it's actually a part of NATO membership, and it's not improper to expect from Sweden and Finland to satisfy them. So I'm optimistic about the future, but at the same time, as Luke pointed rightly, this should not be realized within a week. And this is not, Madrid summit is not the deadline. We have time. We are not short of time. We have time, but it should be based in principles, and it should not be a fragile one.
Thank you. Luke, earlier you described how Finland and Sweden's membership would actually strengthen the alliance. Quite a few things you mentioned are at the military level. As we know, NATO is the best military alliance that has ever existed, especially in modern times, let's say. You said that this would really enhance the NATO capabilities. It would also bring into focus the areas like Arctic that NATO really should care about. So we have a traditional, well, in many senses, I guess, traditional war happening in Ukraine right now. And how would you rate sort of NATO's performance there at the military level? And then wouldn't including Sweden and Finland sort of expand the area of responsibility for NATO, making it harder actually to defend the alliance as a overall? And I don't say this from the viewpoint of Turkey. I'm just discussing this in terms of what the NATO vision should be, what NATO should be in the future.
No, of course. On your last point there, because of their geopolitical circumstances over the past several decades in the case of Finland, or the past couple of centuries in the case of Sweden, they have developed very robust combined armed militaries that are able to, with the whole sole idea of homeland defense. So it's not as if, NATO would be inheriting two countries that just cannot defend themselves already. So in that sense, I don't see any problem there. They're capable. They won't be reliant on the alliance, and I think they'll add to the alliance. On your first question about NATO's role in Ukraine, or judging NATO's role this far in Ukraine, we have to remember that NATO's role in Ukraine is actually very limited. It's not involved in a military sense. It showed political cohesion. I think NATO's done quite well reinforcing its eastern flank. So I give it top marks so far. Even the issues where we have seen some slowness or dithering, and that is the issue of providing advanced weapons to the Ukrainians. This is an issue that is beyond the competencies of NATO. Although they're NATO members that are doing it, NATO as an institution isn't the one leading on it. So I think so far NATO has done really well, because its number one responsibility is the defense and security of its member states. And I think it's taken adequate measures to defend the NATO members that border Russia and Eastern Europe.
Yeah, that's what I meant, what you said. And I wanted to bring the discussion to the political level. While NATO is the best military alliance, and it, like you said, capabilities are there, and even for these new applicants. But do you feel like political discussion should be enhanced within NATO? Because, and do you think this is there is some, we often see them disagreeing on how to confront Russia, and it takes time. So do you think that political debate has to be more robust? And then in enlargement, how would that play?
Well, we are having this debate inside NATO because we have this document called the Strategic Concept that will be published at the next summit in Madrid. And this document is the guiding document for policymakers inside NATO heading into the future, dealing with future threats. The last one that was published was at the Lisbon summit in 2010, 12 years ago. I mean, think about what has changed in the world since 2010. So this document, this new updated strategic concept, is very much needed. So we are already having this debate inside the alliance. What I don't want to see happening is the debates inside the alliance taking place that should probably be held outside of the alliance. We can't forget that NATO is an intergovernmental security alliance with the sole and main goal of the territorial defense of its member states. Mm-hmm. When we start asking NATO to do more than that, that's when we start having political problems. If we focus on self-defense, I think that's when things run smoothly. In terms of the issue of enlargement, I mean, putting Finland and Sweden to one side, which I know the whole topic of today's discussion is Finland and Sweden, so I won't put it too far to one side, but just put it to one side for a little bit. We have entered this era of NATO enlargement where we have very complex, difficult, challenging cases. And, Georgia with its partial Russian occupation, Bosnia and Herzegovina with its internal dynamics with Republika Srpska, Kosovo, which, isn't even recognized by 4 NATO members as being a sovereign state. And then, of course, Ukraine, which, is in a full-blown war against Russia right now. And all the tools that we have for NATO enlargement up to this point have been designed for and built for straightforward cases. How do we get Poland into the alliance? How do we get Hungary into the alliance? How do we get Lithuania into the alliance? So we have to update and modernize our approach to deal specifically with these more complex countries to get them into the alliance in the future. And I do believe that NATO enlargement is a positive thing. It brings stability, it brings security, it brings economic investment because of the stability and security. And I think we should, if a country wants to join the alliance and they're in Europe and all the other countries agree to it, then we should keep that door open. But we have to make sure that Russia does not have a veto, either explicitly or implicitly, on the process.
Thank you, Luke. There's actually a question from the audience while we were discussing this prior to the session. The two of you, we kind of talked about this. So it's about basically maybe, admitting Finland, but not Sweden. So that's an audience question. Professor Duran, I'll direct it to you first. I'll read it, and then I'll ask Luke as well. If Turkey is more concerned about Sweden's relations with various Kurdish groups than with Finland's, wouldn't it have made more sense for Turkey to approve Finnish membership in NATO now, but not Swedish? Would this approach have gotten more sympathy in other NATO members? Finland, after all, borders Russia and is under greater threat than Sweden.
Well, it's a good question. Well, for the Turkish official explanations, I understand that there is no such clear distinction between Sweden and Finland. But at the same time, I understand that there is, of course, more criticism towards Sweden, not to Finland. But in overall European experience, this suitable environment for PKK and other terrorist organizations, that they are taking some facilities to advance their finance, their militants, and their propaganda. So Finland also is criticized from the same conditions. But of course, Sweden is much more in a much more open place to such activities. As I said before, even now, while we are discussing all these issues, PKK-affiliated groups can show Öcalan's pictures and PKK flags, as if they are trying to make seem that Swedish politics is captive of their activities. And again, in Sweden, there is just one deputy which is pushing harder to the government for these embargo issues because of Turkey's Syria operations in 2019. But these are not acceptable. Allies should not put embargo on each other. This is the first item. And the second one for Sweden, yes, even they are permitting terrorist organizations for their activities, open activities. It is not forbidden. So this should not be seen in such a ally, or that we will fight for them. Turkey will fight for them in case of any threat coming outside. So these are the rules of alliance, and I believe that NATO capitals should understand Turkey's concerns. Turkey is trying to make much more unified NATO. You will remember that under Trump administration, the Western capitals were talking about, NATO is outmoded and there is a brain death. And so all these discussions were about NATO. And then Turkey was supporting the unity of NATO, cohesion of NATO. And Turkey is still doing this, even in confronting the Russian problems, concerns in Syria, in Libya, in Nagorno-Karabakh. Turkey provided a good example, a good performance in dealing with these all issues, in spite of the criticism for the S-400 issue. But now Turkey is, of course, supporting NATO's enlargement and considering this some vital issue. But this should be based on the security arrangements that be fulfilled for the Turkey's as well. Well, separating Sweden and Finland, coming back to your question, at least now it seems that they are together. But in the long run, if Finland is much more capable of providing some concrete measures for Turkey, it would be easier to separate them. But for now, I cannot say that Finland has fulfilled all the requirements.
Thank you, Dr. Duran. Luke, let's say, let's assume that in a couple months, hopefully, or 6 months, a year, we don't know exactly, but you gave us the 10-year mark, so we have enough time. So let's say Sweden was able to satisfy, Sweden and Finland were able to satisfy Turkey's concerns and admit it. What do you imagine Russia's reaction would be? They have made some threats in the past. Do you think those would be imminent? And how do you imagine in that situation NATO might react to potential Russian aggression, or Russian, let's say, if they move towards the Baltics, what happens then?
Yeah, well, I like I said, I think Finland and Sweden joining NATO will make the whole Northern European, Nordic, Baltic region very secure and stable. We've had lots of mixed messages coming from Moscow. On one hand, you hear people saying that Finland and Sweden joining would be very provocative and Russia would have to respond. On the other hand, I think President Putin himself even said, he doesn't care. Not a big deal to him. And I don't see how, considering the battlefield losses that Russia is taking in Ukraine, I don't see how they would be in any position to go against a NATO member right now. I mean, open source assessments show evidence that more than 25% of Russia's active fleet of main battle tanks have been destroyed in Ukraine already. Nobody knows exactly how many Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded, but it's probably in the tens of thousands. So Russia's not in a position to do much militarily right now.
Luke, you already broadly answered this question, but let me field it to you. So if there's anything else you would like to add. This question says, do you see the situation with Ukraine as analogous to some extent to the Sudetenland situation in 1938, which led up to World War II? Do you not see clear Russian aggression as an attack on democracies, which underpin NATO? Therefore, isn't their membership critical to assuring that Russia is kept at bay, as we do have a ruthless dictator attempting to expand his rule over Ukraine and other democracies? I guess this is a question of democracy, what it means for NATO.
Yeah, for sure. Russia is threatening the democratic order of the Euro-Atlantic community by what they're doing, without a doubt. I wouldn't quite use the analogy of the Sudetenland right before World War II, because the process hasn't played fully out. Now, if the leaders in Europe force Zelensky to come up with some peace settlement that allowed a huge chunk of Ukrainian territory to go to Russia, then we would be talking about the Sudetenland and that scenario. But fortunately, we're not there yet.
Thank you, Luke. Hocam, there's a question. I'm not 100% clear on it, but I'll still pose it to you. As President Erdogan said that we will not commit the same mistake as we did in the case of Greece in 1950s. How far will Turkey go to address its concerns? I guess the question is, how hard is this process going to be from the Turkish perspective?
Well, actually, it's a question of words and deeds, because Turkey received some promises from her allies in the past. When you remember Greece's inclusion into NATO's military part in just after 1980 military coup d'etat in Turkey, there was a soldier promise, to General Evren that there will be some measures for Turkey. But these are all forgotten. And we experienced the same thing about southern Cyprus issue after the Annan Plan. You would remember that the Turkish side accepted Annan Plan, but the southern side, Greek side, did not accept it. But at that time, Helsinki, Finland was the president of the EU, and they promised that we will not accept them into membership. But the reality was so different. I mean,
you mean they subsequently accepted Cyprus as a member, although it's a divided island?
Yeah. It was against the earlier promise that given to Turkey, and even it was promised, and it was stated in the documents. So Turkey this time wants to see some concrete measures, not words but deeds. That's why President Erdogan is so much insistent on seeing something concrete. And I understand that Turkey is so much suffering from her allies' neglectance or some particular support to terrorist organizations, including the US. So, internally, President Erdogan has to do this. Otherwise, President Erdogan and the government will be criticized by the opposition. you are not paying enough attention to security issues when it comes to the Western capitals. Do you know that, Kılıçdaroğlu, CHP's leader, Kılıçdaroğlu is criticizing Erdogan on the basis of making so much concessions to the US and European capitals, including the islands, in the Aegean Islands, including the Syrian refugee issues, and some others. So in such an environment, Turkey has to make a clear stand in regarding this membership issue and the Swedish and Finnish support given to YPG and PKK, and the embargo issues and sanctions about defense industry. It is related to, of course, domestic politics, but it is not emanating from the domestic concerns. It is related to it, and it has to be related to it. President Erdogan has to consider this.
Thank you, Hocam. Luke, maybe let's try to expand this conversation a bit. You did mention China confronting them on the Arctic scene. Do you think NATO can do both? Both give Ukraine enough support, or NATO countries give Ukraine enough support and deal with China in the Arctic, in other regions? I'm assuming you're seeing a strong sort of responsibility for NATO to think about China. It was already in the concept draft, I believe, back in Brussels last year, and probably it will be featured in the strategic concept paper in Madrid as well. How do you see NATO being able to deal both with Russia and China at the same time?
A good question. When I mention Sweden and Finland and their ability or willingness to stand up to China, and why that makes them a potentially a good NATO member, for me, it was because their instincts are right about China's growing involvement in Europe and also in the Arctic. So I thought, because at the nation state level, they recognize this, I thought that it was a positive thing that they're standing up to this and trying to counter it. I actually don't believe that NATO has much role against China right now. NATO is an intergovernmental security alliance. According to Article 6 of the 1949 North Atlantic Treaty, NATO's area of responsibility is the North Atlantic region north of the Tropic of Cancer. So while the member states need to be worried about what China's doing, as long as China doesn't pose a military threat in the North Atlantic area north of the Tropic of Cancer, I think NATO's main focus should remain on Russia. Now, this goes back to my original point about what the member states are doing and what countries like Finland and Sweden are doing. This is so important because most of the threats coming from China to Europe and to NATO are on issues that NATO has no policy competency over. NATO has no authority over reviewing or blocking or approving questionable Chinese investments in port infrastructure or airports. It has no trade or sanctions authority when it comes to China. It's a security alliance, right? But the member states do have this authority, and in some cases, the European Union does have these authorities. So that's why, even though NATO doesn't have the authorities to deal with the threats coming from China, if the member states don't address these threats properly, it could impact NATO. So I think it's inevitable in this day and age, in the year 2022, that China will feature in the strategic concept. I mean, if you go back to the last one in 2010, it's 40 pages long, and the word China is literally not found anywhere in the document. I think we're going to see China mentioned, but I really hope NATO remains focused on its core task of collective defense in the North Atlantic region, and that today is Russia.
Luke, before turning to Dr. Duran, let me pose you this question very quickly. Summary of the question is basically, setting aside the legitimacy of concerns Turkey has, how would it impact Turkey's stance on Finland and Sweden? How would it impact its standing within the NATO alliance?
NATO inside the alliance, or Turkey inside the NATO alliance now already has a very complex relationship because of issues like S-400, for example. But Turkey is too important. I mean, at the end of the day, these countries that raise eyebrows, or countries that are questioning, why buying S-400s, they know that Turkey is too important to the alliance and has been for decades. So this is why it's important that we find ways to get through some of these challenging times internally inside the alliance. Also, I think there are many countries in Europe who understand where Turkey's coming from on the PKK issue. I mean, all of Europe has declared the PKK to be a terrorist organization, including Finland and Sweden. So I think there's some sympathy there, but I do believe that everyone would like to see this issue resolved as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Luke. Hocam, I'm turning to you. One, go ahead and maybe address this question. Turkey within the alliance, does this make things, there could be a point where, Turkey, the obstructionist within the alliance, perhaps that those arguments will surface. They haven't yet quite a bit, but aside from those crazy ones that talked about kicking Turkey out of NATO years ago, but that's one question. The other question is, there have been some arguments made on the level of, okay, Finland and Sweden are EU members. If they're admitted into the NATO, this actually creates a better overlap between NATO and the EU. And of course, Turkey has been waiting at the door of membership, EU membership, for many, many years. Turkey has very strong words about that as well. Against the European countries, and especially Cyprus, we just mentioned. So is that an argument that convinces Turkey at all, at any level, while Turkey is not even the negotiation chapters are not happening with Turkey? Perhaps these two questions. I hope I didn't confuse too many issues, but basically Turkey's alliance standing in the alliance, and this question of overlapping membership between EU and NATO.
Well, actually, Dr. Ustun, two questions are interrelated. Both of them address the Turkey's stand within NATO and EU. Turkey is also a candidate country, a membership, a candidate in a process of membership. Well, we are seeing sometimes different comments on Turkey's stand within NATO. I strongly believe that Turkey is a vital part of Western allies, including NATO. Sometimes we hear different discussions in Turkey as well, but all of the discussions are actually blind or deaf to strategic realities. Just after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we have seen Turkey's strategic importance in the region, from not just from Eastern Europe to Black Sea or the Mediterranean or to the Middle East. Turkey is actually in the center of European security architecture as well. So to talk about Turkey, to talk about Turkey's place within NATO and EU are actually so much interrelated. And actually it has to be taken as interrelated. the main problem comes from not accepting Turkey's special place and contribution to European security as well. So Turkey's concerns should not be taken just as some problems, some nuisance on NATO's cohesion. On the contrary, to satisfy Turkey's security concerns would contribute to NATO's cohesion. Why? Because Turkey has the second largest army within NATO, and Turkey provided many security services to NATO in different places, as Luke mentioned generally. So in confronting Russia, again, Turkey's strategic position and again, Turkey's contribution to NATO security architecture are very critical. So I understand that Secretary General Stoltenberg is very aware of this reality, and that's why he's trying to make a negotiation, a common point between parties, among the parties. So these crazy issues of kicking Turkey out of NATO are not relevant to actual discussions, not strategic, not academic discussions. But of course, Western capitals, Western media are so much debating about Turkey and President Erdogan. So sometimes they are losing their favor and their wisdom that they may conclude in such crazy comments. But in reality and strategy, just after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, necessitates Turkey's meaningful, strong place within NATO. So that's why all of these discussions around Finland and Sweden's membership are not, secondary issues, are not just problems. They are options and opportunities to make more coherent NATO. And
Thank you.
Did I answer the second question?
Yes.
I can add something to this reality that Turkey around her region is a stabilizing country, is providing security and stability to the Middle East and other regions. Even just after the withdrawal of the US, partial withdrawal of the US from the Middle East, there will be more problems in the region. And Turkey is the only NATO country in the region to provide some security to Europe as well. So all of these issues should be taken together.
One last question. I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding in the audience that, the question is asking whether it would be satisfactory for Turkey if Sweden and Finland accepted PKK as a terrorist organization, but EU already designated PKK as a terrorist organization. Turkey's issue is not with this, right, Professor Duran? It's more about...
Yeah, right. We know that all NATO members, the US and EU, are accepting PKK as a terrorist organization. But we have other problems. One is the reality. They are not applying this in their daily lives. The PKK is still harboring some militants, finance, and other terrorist activities in European countries, in Sweden and in Finland. And there is another one, YPG issue. YPG is a branch of PKK. All our Western allies know that, but in reality, they refuse to accept that. Mm-hmm. And the third issue is the sanctions, actually, embargo.
Yeah. Thank you very much for clarifying that again. I want to thank our audience. I want to thank our participants, Luke, Burhanettin. I really appreciate your comments. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, misperceptions about what's happening regarding NATO enlargement. In the case of Sweden and Finland's application and also Turkey's position on this. It looks like you guys both made it clear that this is probably not going to be resolved within the next week. So we may not, we shouldn't maybe expect big news out of Madrid summit regarding this. But of course, we will continue to discuss this issue. It's very critical for the future of NATO, Western security, transatlantic security. So I want to thank you all again, and I want to end this session here. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for following us.
Thank you, Kadir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Bye-bye.